Well, I think we can all agree this is a once-in-a-generation federal election that we're all facing as Canadians. We want to take a very local approach to the issues tonight, and I'm so happy to be joined by incredible guests. Michael Curran is joining me, Christina Spencer, and David Smith. I'm Sam Laprade. We're going to guide you through this next hour and really have an idea of what's happening from a local perspective in this community. I'm going to start with you, Mike.
Sure.
We've been watching very closely those advance polls. Many people, after the Easter Bunny came, they headed off to the polls and cast their ballot. 7.3 million Canadians cast their ballot, up 25%. What does this tell you about this election?
I was at the Orleans Legion on Taylor Creek last night. It was a Easter Monday, of course, and probably around 7:30. So there were only 30 minutes before the advance polls closed, and there were 150 people there in the pouring rain.
Wow.
So that was surprising to me. I had heard how big the lines were. I saw them when driving by once, but I think it certainly demonstrates the obvious facts would be, you know, the level of engagement, how unique and important people feel this election is, and I think people are motivated to get out there and vote and have their say.
For sure. And Christine, your perspective on this election, we certainly thought, even 90, 120 days ago, this election was going in a very different way. What does the last 3 or 4 months look like for you?
Well, you're right. I mean, it's reversed. It's gone from one direction to another very, very quickly, probably even more quickly than the Liberal Party thought it would, although in their wildest dreams, it's probably what they were looking for. But I was also voting on the weekend. We managed to get out when everybody, I think, was maybe at church or something, so not too long a lineup. But what that has told me is not only that people think it's an extremely important election, which is pretty self-evident, but that they are also very positive about the choices, that they think there are distinct choices in this election.
Really, really interesting perspective. And David, I mean, you have your finger on the pulse of what's happening across this country in your role here at Rogers Radio. Give me a sense of what you're hearing, whether it's from callers, whether it's from your colleagues across the country.
Yeah, as Mike and Christina have mentioned, I think the turnout over the long weekend, it indicates two things. First, and I don't think enough people have talked about this, doing advanced polling on a stat holiday is super effective. It's a great it's a great opportunity for people to get out and vote early. You know, if you have a house full of family and they're driving you nuts, you can sneak off and vote for a little while.
Yeah.
But of course, it does also speak to just how engaged people are in this specific race. You know, we just had a provincial election only a couple of months ago, feels like longer than that now in Ontario, but we didn't see nearly the kind of engagement we did. We didn't see nearly the same kind of engagement with the provincial voter turnout as we have just with advanced polls this time around. And I'm very curious to see whether that trend continues on Election Day, whether we see a huge record turnout for the vote writ large, or if it's just a case of a lot of people who had the time and went out and got it done, and maybe the final turnout is a little bit more what we're used to seeing on Election Day. But nonetheless, an engaged citizenry is good for democracy. It's good that people are paying attention, and I think it bodes well for Canadians feeling like they do really have a say in choosing the next government in this country.
Well, and I think if you were writing a story, Christina, you couldn't have written this. I mean, in terms of what's happening south of the border, obviously with President Donald Trump and his threats against Canada in terms of tariffs, and then you add in the leadership change that happened at the Liberal Party. You really couldn't kind of script this any better, if you will, for kind of an exciting race. What do you think is top of mind? If you had to pick one issue that the Canadians and here locally are thinking about, what is that?
Well, I mean, I think it's the same whether it's local or Canada, right? It's Trump. That is the issue. And that's what's defining what every party has been doing. It's what's defining what's happened to the NDP. It's what happened to the Liberals. It's what happened to the Tories. All of that is around Trump and people's concern about tariffs, or more generally about what the U.S. will do going forward. And that's trickled right to the local level. We have all sorts of local issues here in Ottawa that have kind of gone into the background, which is interesting and a little unfortunate, but entirely understandable.
And would you agree with Christina that is the issue? David, is there something else on your mind?
Yes and no. It's interesting when you dig into some of the polling data and you take a look at what's driving vote intention in different demographics. We have seen that Trump, across the board, top line, the trade issue, the anxiety about the world economy is driving a lot of votes right now, but much more so in certain segments of the population, and most notably amongst a demographic who are more likely to already own a home, more likely to either be retired or be close to retirement. Whereas if you take a look at some of the response from the under 40 demographic, which I am happy to represent here tonight, housing affordability, cost of living across the board, tax fairness, all of these things are ranking much more highly amongst younger Canadians who are less likely to be as secure in life as the older voting demographic. But one of the big question marks there is how many of them are actually going to turn out and vote, because we know that the over 60 crowd, who are at this point more likely to support Mark Carney and the Liberals, they vote in much greater numbers than the under 40 crowd. So to me, that's a big question mark that we'll see when it comes to the final tally and the turnout on election night, is whether or not those people who say Trump is maybe a little bit more secondary to some of these other domestic concerns, whether or not they show up and make their voices heard.
Really interesting perspective. You and I met early this morning, along with a couple of hundred other people, at the mayor's breakfast this morning. David Coletto from Abacus Data just walked us through what he's seeing over the last number of months. Really fascinating data coming from David. When I think about business, I think about Mike Curran. It's synonymous in this city. So talk to me what businesses are telling you.
Well, they're concerned. And there's kind of the surface level maybe view of this and a little bit of a deeper level. When I think surface level, I've seen very significant concern. I was in a meeting last week with 16 local tech CEOs, a little bit of a confidential setting, but several people said they were feeling more stress and more threats around their business right now than during the early days of the pandemic. It's that significant. Now, the economy isn't one thing. There's many different sectors of the local economy. The people that were saying that were involved in importing, exporting, hard goods, housing type sector, manufacturing, that type of stuff. Other people in the room were much more confident and thought that, we might be, they were aware of the threats, but willing to survive and thrive in these times. And I think a lot of the entrepreneurs in the city, I know this is one of those phrases that gets thrown out during the pandemic and right now, Sam, but at every crisis, there's opportunity for businesses to reshape themselves, to reconsider what they do, the value they're providing their clients, and kind of what they're offering out there too. So I think it's a little bit of a mixed bag, but there's certainly, it seemed at least a few weeks ago like the early days of the pandemic, right? Like news was changing on a daily basis. Some people are creating, I hate to say this, layoff plans, contingency plans, if their suppliers get disrupted or if they're subject to significant tariffs.
Really interesting. And we'll go back. I want to kick off this question with you, David. In terms of affordability, I mean, you've talked about, the housing crisis that we're in. How are these leaders talking about housing? Here in this obviously city, we've seen a little bit of a housing crisis as well. Do you think that the leaders talked enough, or the candidates as well, talked enough about what they're going to do for affordability and housing in this city?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that if I were going to give top marks to one party on housing, it would have to be the Conservative Party. Pierre Poilievre staked out his territory on that issue really 2 years ago when he won the leadership of the Conservative Party. And their platform has been much more affordability focused than the Liberals under Mark Carney. They've been playing much more into the anxiety around the Trump issue. What I will say is that I do believe housing has taken maybe not a back seat so far in this campaign, but it hasn't been in the front seat as much as someone like myself, who would like to own a home one day, would have liked to have seen it. In an interview I did recently with the Canada Housing Coalition, they put out a 10-point policy framework for what they want to see from the next federal government in terms of responding to the housing crisis. And despite lofty targets from all three main federal parties, the NDP is promising 3.5 million homes, the Liberals 2 million, the Conservatives 2.3 million. All of those actually fall short of what the CMHC has said would be required to restore affordability to the market. So even though you have some ambitious plans out there, the experts are telling us that they're not quite going far enough. And it's hard not to think that some of that is because the specter of Trump and the trade war is drawing focus from that issue.
Really interesting. What are your thoughts on the housing issue, Christina?
Certainly one of the local issues that has been sitting in the shadows because of this overarching fear of what's happening south of the border. But the housing issue is interesting because, I mean, we've just seen the party platforms, right, being unfurled for us this past weekend and today. Whether your number is this many million or this many 100,000 or whatever it is, it's a far cry from that party actually being able to deliver because they haven't been able to. So is it a question of, I know we'll have a great prefab housing strategy and our magic new housing corporation will make that happen? Or is it, as Doug Ford was saying during the provincial election, if we just create and help put in place the conditions for a better, more robust economy, these things will solve themselves over time. I tend to be more in that category. I don't believe that every big government program and every big promise is going to get us very far on almost anything. And housing, I think, has been kind of the example of that. They're focused. They want to do something on housing. They all want to. But, you know, ultimately, it's a matter of whether and when you'll be able to afford one. And that means you need a good, healthy economy.
And if I could pick up on that just quickly, another factor that doesn't cut through with the rhetoric and sometimes the news coverage of the housing issue is that so much of it is fundamentally not a primary responsibility of the federal government. So much of it has to do with local zoning decisions, with development charges, things that are controlled exclusively by the municipality and by the province. So at the end of the day, there's only so much a federal government can actually do in the short term to boost housing supplies. Christina said, you know, creating those economic conditions, the rising tide to lift all boats,
right,
et cetera.
absolutely.
I'll jump in on the
We're
business.
We're going to come back in a second. If you can believe it,
Yeah.
I've got to go to break.
My.
We're going to be back, though, don't you worry. Michael Curran, Christina Spencer, David Smith, and Sam Laprade. We'll be back with you as we watch this federal election.
This program is brought to you by Rogers Xfinity, connecting you to more of what you love. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Hi, I'm Meg, and this is Fit Finley. Join me for Season 3 of Fit Over 50 with Meg, exclusively on Rogers TV. You're going to love the workouts that I lead you through. We're going to be using resistance bands, weights, your own body weight, and a chair. These workouts are for people over the age of 50, but no matter what age you are, you're going to love them. Can't wait to see you then.
In baseball, there's nothing more important than making it home.
George Springer has tied the game.
Doesn't matter how you get there.
It's gone!
But I do it with style.
Boy, has he got some kind of power.
And a little swagger, too.
Because no matter where you happen to be,
Oh, what a play!
There's only one place
Got it!
Jays fans call home.
Sportsnet. Sportsnet.
Sportsnet.
Sportsnet, home of the Blue Jays.
Join me, holistic chef Daniela Croco, for Season 4 of Simply Cooking by Chef, right here on Rogers TV.
Well, there's a battle going on, and it's between the blue and the red, and I'm not talking about the Leafs and the Senators. Of course, the big federal election is happening April 28th. If you haven't voted already, you're going to want to have a plan for the big day, because I think it'll be very busy. We know that over 7.3 million Canadians have already cast their votes in the advance polls, so Canadians are definitely engaged. We're talking all things local tonight with Michael Curran, Christina Spencer, and David Smith. We were talking about housing just before we broke, and I know you had something exceptional to say. We want to hear it, Michael.
I don't know if it's exceptional. I'm trying to add the business perspective tonight.
For sure.
But picking up on a couple of things David said, and again, this is kind of what I'm picking up from the local construction and real estate community. One, I think we've got a continuing issue of permit approvals in this city. So, I mean, I've literally heard that for 10 to 20 years. The mayor's struck a task force to try to deal with it. But the other unique issue here in Ottawa is labor mobility, right? So we're all talking about interprovincial trade barriers. If you pull up to a Minto site or a Claridge site, you're going to see a lot of Quebec license plates. So we're drawing a lot of those laborers from Quebec. And of course, there's different regimes if you're in the trades and trying to maintain that. So it's an issue that probably demonstrates the complexity, as you were saying, Christina. Like, we all think these big government programs can move the needle and get 1 million homes built, but there's all these barriers that have to be overcome, and sometimes they are local, and there's unique local factors, right?
Yeah, really interesting. And to have, obviously, the leaders of the two biggest parties in our own community is really rare. We know that Mark Carney obviously is with the Nepean riding now. He's knocking on doors, we hear, in that riding. At least his wife is knocking on doors in that riding, and of course Pierre Poilievre representing the Carleton ward. I voted, and it was like War and Peace ballot. It was huge.
Okay.
91 names on that ballot. How important do you think, from a local perspective, is it for us to have this view of these two leaders sometimes in your own riding or right in your back door?
Well, I think, first of all, that neither of these two leaders has put themselves forward truly as a candidate for Ottawa, right? They both want to be prime minister. They got bigger fish to fry, however they might think about it. For us, as citizens of Ottawa, we ought to be able to think, whichever one of these people becomes prime minister, they will look after this city as a national capital. And I don't see that happening on either campaign right now. If you think about the things that a national capital should have or should be focused on, whether it's the same kind of problems other metropolitan areas have, such as we were just talking about housing, but other things like it's a capital city, right? We should have first of all, you should be able to get across the bridges. What about the 6th crossing? Hasn't been talked about by either of these, not in their platform. It is in the Gatineau candidates' platforms, but this is an important issue to be sorted here properly, right? Other things like the downtown of a national capital, this hollowed out core. I don't hear either of them talking about what they would do about that sort of thing. So there are a number of issues. I think that as residents of the capital, we should be hearing from both of them, and we're not.
Really interesting perspective. David, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's so important that locally, for people living in Ottawa, in those two ridings, that those two leaders are represented in our local election race. Our politics in this country are so leader-focused. I think most people that you stop on the street, when you ask them which way they're leaning, they'll tell you, well, I'm a Poilievre guy or I'm a Carney guy. Not so much I'm a conservative guy or a liberal guy, or even that they have a strong understanding of who their local candidate is. Some people might not even know the name of their local candidate until they go to cast their ballot. So it's very interesting that so many people, hundreds of thousands of people in Ottawa, actually get to cast their vote for Mark Carney or for Pierre Poilievre. That's kind of cool on the surface. Under the surface level, though, what Christina is saying is so totally right. There are so many unique aspects of the National Capital Region that we discussed at length through the pandemic, primarily to do with the dynamics of our labor force, which is driving the issues that we see downtown right now. I live downtown. I have seen over the past 5 years just how much it has changed, and it's heartbreaking to see these local businesses either fail or simply exit the downtown area because it's no longer in their best interest to be there. I was really hoping one of these two leaders would have a meeting with Mayor Sutcliffe during this campaign and talk to him about that new deal for Ottawa that he's been pushing. Talk to him about this $100 million tax bill that he has issue with. You know, he says the federal government's been shortchanging Ottawa in terms of those transfers in lieu of taxes for all of these federal government buildings. There's been no discussion about return to work for civil servants. I think both leaders are trying to stay out of that as much as they can just to keep another issue off of their list. But at the end of the day, even though it's not good for their campaigns to get into the nitty-gritty of some of these local issues, that's what ultimately would be best serving the residents of Ottawa, and we just haven't seen a lot of that.
And it's going to be interesting, you know, to have a prime minister in the city will be very different. So talk to me a little bit from a business perspective, Michael.
Yeah, first I was just going to say there seems to be an aversion, right, to talking about Ottawa as a city, as a region, and often, you know, even when you say Ottawa, it's a synonym, of course, in most parts of the country for the federal government, which a lot of business people object to. And the number of times, by the way, people have complained to me and say, we're going to change that. I'm like, good luck with that. Changing the country's vocabulary. I mean, Washington, you know, has some of the similar issues. But I do believe, you know, you're right, David and Christina, there's some real significant local issues, and the federal government needs to step up and be a full partner in the discussions going around the future of downtown. And I think one of the big ones that pops to mind is the federal government's plan to step out about 50% of the real estate in the downtown core. And there's a ton of concern that that's going to take too long to dispose of those buildings. So we all know the federal government moves at a bit of a snail's pace, and sometimes that's okay. In government, you need to be cautious and that type of thing. But imagine, you know, if 50% of the towers in the downtown core were empty for 5 or 10 years. If you're going to vacate them, then, you know, sell them, dispose of them, tear them down, whatever needs to get done to redevelop the downtown core. And I think in the commercial real estate industry, that's one of the biggest concerns they have, is the slow decision-making progress. So they seem to make the decision they're going to dispose of them, and then they announce what the buildings are, and yet there's, from what I understand, there's zero progress in terms of actually, you know, putting them on the market, if that's the solution.
Yeah. So far, we'll have a prime minister from Ottawa who doesn't think about Ottawa. That's the way it looks right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Even something as simple, and I guess it's not simple, but as straightforward as making a promise during the campaign that the minister in charge of the National Capital Commission will be from Ottawa. That'd be a very simple promise to make, right? And that would make a difference in this city, because you'd have someone at least championing Ottawa at the cabinet table, right?
Absolutely.
And if you want to talk about vote-getting issues, there's some very low-hanging fruit for either of these candidates that they could make pledges on that aren't necessarily major short-term commitments. But let's think about moving the Senators Arena to LeBreton Flats. It would be very simple to announce a chunk of change from the federal government there. How about the third phase of light rail?
Oh, yes.
We have a system right now that's years behind schedule and is still fundamentally only a partial system. And there's no funding commitments from any level of government right now to eventually extend that thing south to Barrhaven. Where are the commitments on some of these issues? It would be very simple for them to at least bring them up on the campaign trail, but I think it speaks to the fact that their priorities and their attention is fundamentally elsewhere.
I like the point on LeBreton, David, and imagine if they would have said that about the arena and affordable housing at the same time, right? There's still a dream of a significant amount of affordable housing at LeBreton. They could have, because there's a lot of politics to, you know, announcing, of course, funding for a hockey arena. There's a lot of people in our city that are staunchly opposed to that. But I think one of the ways of counteracting that is to say, and here's a chunk of money for some affordable housing at LeBreton. Restore what was there, you know, 60 years ago.
People love free money from the federal government for infrastructure projects. It's always popular.
Yeah, and kind of, you know, kind of going with that housing theme, immigration has been top of mind, obviously. I mean, I think back to the days you and I were doing radio every single day. Immigration was a topic we talked about every single day. This election, it has been top of mind for many. Do you think the leaders have done a good job, and the local candidates have done a good job talking about immigration, David?
Oh, that's a good question. Have they done a good job of it politically in that they've talked about it without stepping in it? Absolutely. Have they done a good job of substantively addressing the issue? Not really. I think Mark Carney faces more pressure on immigration, I think, than Poilievre would, because he's wearing the Liberal record. They were the ones who made the changes to the immigration system coming out of the pandemic, which they have since rolled back, admitting they went too big too soon. They rolled back some of those changes in the period just before Justin Trudeau stepped down, Mark Carney took over, and then we were into the election race with Donald Trump dominating the news. But since then, with the caveat of some generic promises to tie future levels of immigration to social capacity, housing, healthcare, what have you, I haven't heard Mark Carney come out and say specifically where his philosophy on immigration lies, nor have I heard Pierre Poilievre, with the exception of those generic promises, talk about a permanent resident target that he would like to see for the National Capital Region. I mean, we're a very diverse city. We have a huge immigrant population, which is fantastic, but we're also a city that's still trying to build a new hospital. We're a city with, as I mentioned, half of a transit system. We're a city where we have a very stable labor force in the federal government, but lots of associated industries that rely on the core federal civil service for their business. A lot of these people, a lot of these enterprises, I'm sure Mike can speak to that, are hiring temporary foreign workers, are hiring from immigrant communities, but there's been no mention from any of these candidates about a National Capital Region specific plan on immigration, which I think is lacking.
We only have a couple minutes left. I want to get both your perspectives. Mike, go first, and just talk to me a little bit about immigration from a business perspective.
Well, you know where I'm seeing it play out is actually in our post-secondary institutions. Right. So it's not just immigration, it's the foreign students. Yeah. So I have the opportunity to speak with deans and college presidents, university presidents, and it's, you know, it is frightening, the language they use to explain their financial positions. So we've had tuition freeze in Ontario since about 2018. So imagine that, right, with the rate of inflation, and you're locked down in a unionized work environment with capital buildings in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And you know, the way we were coping, kind of the thing that was keeping the machine funded, were foreign students, of course, where they didn't have those tuition caps and that. So the tightening of immigration is having a massive impact. Look at Algonquin, you know, the number of programs. I saw Claude Brûlé this morning. The impact, I mean, I think they're up to about 30 programs. So these are, the decision to scale back on immigration is having an impact on housing, on healthcare, but also post-secondaries, which almost never gets talked about, right?
Really interesting tie-in there. Christina, we only have about 30 seconds.
Actually, I'll just pick up on that. I teach at Carleton in the fall, and so a number of my students have said they're quite concerned, obviously, about their friends who are international students, what happens to them, what they're facing. And it is really, you know, when you're talking about young people who may be voting, this is an issue for them. They're quite concerned about it, regardless of what the financials are for the institution. They're seeing it at a very human level.
For sure. And I think about, because my daughter's about to go to college, I mean, I think about parents that have saved that RESP money, and now we're like, where are we going to put it, right? I mean, my daughter got into college. I'm grateful for that. Her program wasn't cut. But the reality is a lot of parents are facing, and a lot of students are facing the same thing. We have so much to talk about. We're going to come back. Michael Curran, Christina Spencer, and David Smith, we're going to return to talk about the public service. What does this election mean for maybe you? Stay with us. I'm Sam Laprade.
Welcome to Community News and Events on Rogers TV Channel 22. I'm Lamine Medri. A federal election is set to take place on April 28th, and every vote matters. To register to vote or update your information, visit elections.ca. You can also look up the location of your riding, your polling location, who the candidates are, and different options to vote, such as voting early, in person, or voting by mail. Advanced polling stations are available from April 18th to 21st, and the deadline to apply to vote by mail or by special ballot is April 22nd. Visit elections.ca or call 1-800-463-6868 for more information. To have your community news or events listed on our website, head to rogerstv.com, click on Events, and post your event. That's it.
Well, the date on your calendar is probably circled. April 28th is the big day, Election Day here in Canada, and we know that this election is so important to Canadians. We saw an incredible turnout for the advanced polls, and we know Election Day will be very busy. There's one group of people I'm thinking about a lot. Many are friends, and those are people that work in the public service. And recently, Michael Curran from the Ottawa Business Journal wrote a really interesting op-ed on the public service. Of course, we're joined as well by Christina Spencer and David Smith. I read every single word, Michael, because that piece that you wrote was really impactful for me. I really worry about my friends. They worry. They're up at night worried about what's going to happen to the public service.
I think it's a sleeper issue, right? And I think what might be a little bit unique, I'd love Christina's opinion on this, is that we have two parties that will both contemplate deficiencies in the public service. Typically, it's been one or the other. Although the last time, if my history is right on this, were the Paul Martin days where we saw the really significant cutbacks in Ottawa. But of course, all of this needs to be put into context. And even Mark Carney, I think on Sunday when he unveiled the Liberal platform, mentioned he used the number, which is higher than the number that some other people use, 40% growth in the public service. So we've seen effectively a ballooning of the public service. I'm not saying that's wrong. Part of that was probably necessary because of the pandemic. We needed to get people working. We needed to get those checks, so to speak, out the door. But now that's caused a really significant problem, particularly given the size of the federal deficit, which simple math is around $50 billion. So I think what's deeply concerning to me is this ballooning of the federal public service, the significant deficit that we have right now, and promises by both of the federal leaders to add tens of billions of more funding. Well, look, something has to give. Whether it's Carney or whether it's Poilievre, both of them will look to control the deficit to some degree. Public servants or the labor force of the federal government is about 8%, based on what I can see, of total federal spending. So there's not a lot of places they can cut. I think they're going to turn to cutting public servants, and I think it's going to be, to the tune of tens of thousands of people.
And in many cases, Christina, I mean, over certainly my lifetime, Ottawa has tended to be in a bit of a bubble. Other than those, other than those days that we referred to a minute ago. But I think people are feeling it more than ever that this election may result in maybe job loss in their home.
Well, I think part of the uncertainty as well comes from the platforms, basically. There will certainly be cuts. How will they happen? I think both leaders have been comfortably vague. They've made some hints about it, attrition, right, or retirements, or we'll get rid of contracting out. But there are no numbers attached to that. How will you do it? If you're in the public service, you know how difficult it's actually going to be to do any of those things. In my department, who on earth would you cut?
Right.
Among contractors, it's easy and politically cheap to say, we'll get rid of that. That was a political fireball for the Liberals in the last term. But it's not easy to do. These people come in for a reason. So how it will happen, I think, is probably almost as scary to people as what will the number be.
Right. Because
nobody can is it me? Is it my neighbor? No one knows.
And I think the difference between our age groups, I won't talk about how old I am. But, you know, it was if you got a job as a young person in the government, you were set. David, are those days over? Like, do you see your friends getting jobs and feeling like this is where they're going to be for the rest of their lives?
That's certainly the big fear. And I think that the two groups probably most anxious about that are civil servants who are close to retirement and civil servants who are just starting out. I have a family member who's in the former camp. I have many friends and peers who are in the latter camp. What I've heard is that even heading into this election, the opportunities for entry-level jobs in the federal government over the last year or so have dried up to a certain extent. There's been a lot of freezing of hiring new positions. There have been a lot of contracts that haven't been renewed. And I wasn't around for the last federal government downsizing in the 1990s, but people certainly talk about it in an apocalyptic sense, and I can only imagine what that was like at the time. So that trauma, I think, if I could use the word trauma, that the community here has experienced in the past generation is definitely still top of mind for people who are around when it happened. The good news now, to put a positive spin on it, is that the fiscal position of the federal government is not as bad as it was during the debt crisis. You do have even Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, their costed platform out this morning, is running deficits for the next 4 years. It's not like they're outwardly pledging to slash and burn the federal civil service for the sake of meeting an arbitrary timeline for balancing the budget. But I think anyone who works in the federal government, they would be kidding themselves to think that it's not going to be a bit of a rocky road ahead, whichever party forms government, because in Mark Carney's costed platform for the Liberals, there's still $20 billion of savings that they attribute to improving the efficiency of government. Well, how do you improve efficiency? You do the same work with less, and that means job cuts.
Which, in fact, brings up, when you talk about uncertainty, the new level of uncertainty is also the fact that if you're a public servant, you don't actually know which one is your party now. Right? It used to be that, the Liberals were friendlier, and the Conservatives were the Harper slash and burners. And that's no longer, I remember in 2015, right, when Trudeau was elected, and all of those folks at Foreign Affairs were applauding him when he walked into the building because they were so relieved it wasn't a Harper government anymore. But now, so we've had growth because of the pandemic. Now we have a leader who is saying, no, we will be making savings one way or another. AI, what will that do? Nobody has the first idea what that will mean to their jobs, right? So you've got that. You've got Poilievre on the other side. Which one of these will be friendlier to us? We're public servants, we have no idea.
It's going to be so interesting to see how that plays out. Christina, let me ask you, you've obviously got your finger on the pulse of what's happening on a local level. Are there any of those ridings that you think will have a significant shift? Are you seeing a significant shift in any of those ridings that we presently have an incumbent in?
Short answer, no. I don't think so.
Yeah.
No, I mean, where you might see some, I don't even think you'll see riding changes necessarily there, but we have no incumbent in the East End, in Prescott, Cumberland, Orleans. So maybe you see something different just because they're fresh candidates.
Yeah.
It's hard to know. It has gone Tory before that area, roughly. It's been Liberal. I suspect it's going to stay Liberal just because of that whole Liberal wave right now.
There's an obvious connection between those two, right?
Yes.
The number of public servants living in local ridings.
That's right.
And
That's why we're always so red.
That is exactly it. And you know, who can blame them to some degree? They're looking for that job stability. But, you know, I think Christina said something really important that I'll just underline, is that uncertainty, which will cause the problem, right? So we know the federal government, as we were talking about earlier, doesn't move fast on things. So if that if there's a sense of looming cuts, you know, public servants to some degree get into the public service for job safety, security, benefits, and that type of stuff. They're risk-averse people. You start questioning whether or not they have a job, they'll stop spending. You know, how does that affect restaurants? How does that affect retail? How does that trickle down to the local economy? Really quickly. And I think what a lot of people in the business sector are starting to turn their attention to is some sort of formal group that will be looking at this. So can we get the federal government, the Board of Trade, Invest Ottawa? In the mid-1990s, which was a little bit before my time at OBJ, I'm always told that there was a sense that they wanted to retool people, right? The people that were exiting the public service and perhaps in their 50s, they had good pensions, maybe they wanted to be an entrepreneur, right? So there was a little bit of a silver lining back then that a lot of these people felt they were too young to fully retire, they had some financial stability, and they might want to, throw their hat in the ring, so to speak, of not politics, but entrepreneurship.
Yeah, really interesting, for
but
sure.
if you think about local candidates here, say you're, Yasser Naqvi in Ottawa Centre, or Anita Vanden Bell, let's say, in Ottawa West Nepean, or whoever. This isn't really a topic you want to be talking about.
No, right.
But if you have to talk about it, maybe you talk to your party and your leader about skills training and how people will bridge a gap that's going to come up at some point here. And I don't hear those conversations happening, and I think that's unfortunate for Ottawa.
Well, and I think we mentioned earlier, Mayor Mark Sutcliffe really holding the federal government's feet to the fire in terms of the taxes in this particular city. It's a really interesting conversation to have, and it will be a very different conversation with Mark Carney than it will be with Pierre Poilievre. Do you think that this is a conversation that needs to happen, a couple days after this election? Is it that important, David?
Well, for us in the city of Ottawa, it's certainly that important. I think whoever is the incoming prime minister may be more focused on meeting with a certain U.S. president than they are with the local mayor. It's just the reality of the situation. But that being said, I am very curious to see whichever candidate becomes prime minister and forms the government, how is the relationship with Mayor Mark Sutcliffe going to be? We know that Pierre Poilievre's style is a little bit more confrontational. It's a little bit more aggressive. Mayor Mark Sutcliffe, I have heard described as being a consensus builder by nature. So how will he perform if that relationship is a little bit less congenial with one candidate? On the other side of things, Mark Carney did not live in the city of Ottawa for the past decade. Pierre Poilievre has, he represents a Southwest End riding, I understand that, but at least he has been here. He understands how the city works. Mark Carney might have a house in Rockcliffe Park, but he's not been working in the capital for the better part of the last decade. Does he have a deep understanding of some of these local issues? I don't know. And that would be an avenue for Mayor Mark Sutcliffe to make his mark with the incoming government. I would like to see a meeting between those two people happen in relatively short order after the voting day, but I'm not holding my breath.
Are you writing the headline already,
Sure.
Michael, for the OBJ? That the mayor meets with the new prime minister?
Yeah.
I mean, that would be something you would cover.
And they did it was the morning after, I think, the mayor had breakfast with Mark Carney the day after the Liberal leadership. So I think the mayor has demonstrated his ability to forge relationships. Look at with the premier, he's had quite a bit of success there. So I think there's a little bit of hope maybe that we've got a local leader who can bring those local issues forward to different levels of government.
But I am curious to hear what his conversation would be with Pierre Poilievre over payments in lieu of taxes.
Yeah,
right.
Probably wouldn't go too far.
Wouldn't go too well, I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, but that's something that I think, as people living in this city, that's something we have to think about. I mean, it's something certainly that's, I think about all the work that's being done in the downtown. I mean, this is an important piece for sure. We have to take another short break, but I promise we're going to be right back. We have one more opportunity to spend time today with David Smith, Christina Spencer, and Michael Curran. I'm Sam Laprade. We're talking about the local perspective on the federal election, of course, coming up on April the 28th. We're coming right back. I hope you do too.
Welcome to Community News and Events on Rogers TV, Channel 22. I'm Josh Rackless. Evening in the Maritimes is Ottawa's premier East Coast kitchen party. This event brings together hundreds of high-profile guests, and you can be part of the fun too. Expect a delicious meal with lobster, beef, and vegan options, live East Coast music, great networking, and exciting auction items, all in support of Able 2. For 28 years, the funds raised at Evening in the Maritimes have helped provide resources for people with disabilities in Ottawa, empowering them to build lives filled with meaning and joy. This year's event takes place on May 29th at the West in Ottawa. Tickets are on sale now at able2.org, but hurry, sales close on May 12th and they're selling fast. To have your community news or event listed on our website, head to rogerstv.com, click on events, and post your event.
This is Ben Weiss of the Historical Society of Ottawa. Join us for a new series here on Rogers TV, where we explore Ottawa's fascinating history, the people, places, and events that shape the city we live in today. Join us as we go time traveling exclusively on Rogers TV.
Well, we certainly hope that every eligible Canadian gets out and votes. And of course, especially here in this community, we're thinking about all of the important issues. We're speaking today with Michael Curran, David Smith, and Christina Spencer about those local issues that you're thinking about, at least the local take, if you will. Healthcare has been on my mind. Is it on the minds? We know, of course, it's provincially delivered, but is healthcare gotten lost in this federal election in your perspective, Christina?
It has gotten lost. I mean, it's always an issue that is near the top of people's priorities for obvious reasons. Anyone who ever deals with the healthcare system knows we have a crisis on our hands. So yes, it's one of the many lost topics. It's also a topic where the feds can't do a huge amount on their own. Because it's provincial. You know, they're not actually supposed to be the ones building the hospitals. They're not actually supposed to be the ones doing things with our doctors and so on. That said, of course, federal governments have always encroached into provincial territory, and there are opportunities here. Right? So one of the opportunities, it's already come up, thanks to the NDP, dental care, pharmacare, all of these things. Mm-hmm. Still lost, though, you know, and how these things will be carried out by either of the parties beyond what is there now, we don't really know. Accreditations for healthcare professionals, trying to woo people back from the United States or people who, you know, are there looking for other outlets. The feds can play a role in these kinds of things quite effectively. We're not hearing that as part of the discussion, and that's kind of too bad, I think.
Mm-hmm. And in your perspective, David, in terms of, you know, where you are in your, you know, sort of life journey and where I am, and I'm thinking to myself, 20 years from now, I'm going to be really concerned about the, you know, the options for healthcare, where maybe that's a little bit down the road for you, but does it still concern you?
No, that's such an interesting point. You know, somebody my age, I'm at the doctor's office maybe once a year, but I know for somebody who was an older Canadian, you might be at the doctor's office more than once a month. So obviously when you're interacting more with the system, its failings become much more acute and much more relatable to you. I do have grandparents who are in their 90s. They have been in and out of the hospital in the last couple of years. All of those experiences have been difficult, to say the least. I think everybody has a story at this point about a nightmarish hospital stay, either for themselves or for a loved one. I am pleasantly surprised by what the main parties have announced on healthcare. As Christina aptly pointed out, it's not their area of primary jurisdiction, but they both, the Conservatives and the Liberal parties, for example, have committed to supporting a pan-Canadian licensing system for family doctors. That's one of the things the Canadian Medical Association has been pushing for, because frankly, it would do a lot to alleviate immediate short-term pressures on staffing. A lot of people may not know this, but here in the Ottawa region, you know, we are a region with Ottawa and Gatineau, but if you have a practice as a doctor in Gatineau and they need somebody to fill in at the Ottawa hospital, you can't just put up your hand and go fill in. You have to pay thousands of dollars to become licensed in the province of Ontario. So in the federal government's capacity, I think the two front runners are at least on the right path. They've shown that they are aware of what the issues are. It hasn't been as front and center as it could have been. No huge spending commitments there. But back to your point about the age difference, you know, for voters in my demographic, yes, healthcare is a pressing concern, but the idea of pouring even more money onto that national debt is a different level of concern because we're the ones who are going to be paying for that in 40, 50 years from now.
Yeah, really, really interesting. I mean, my doctor is about 2 years older than me, and I worry about the day I get that letter saying she's going to retire, honestly. I mean, I think about it, and I'm 54 years old. I mean, these are the things concerning. And we talk a lot about the Ottawa Hospital. So it is really important and I think about businesses in this community, corporations in this community, the federal government, to have a really solid healthcare system. And so talk to me a little bit about, obviously from a national perspective, healthcare. How does it impact businesses, do you think?
Well, every business has employees. They need to be healthy. Their employees need to be healthy. The pandemic, as Su Ling Ching from the Board of Trade often says, demonstrated how health is a key economic platform. Maybe the one thing I'll contribute on the health is just the people I talk to are so desperate for innovation in healthcare. So there's, I think, a growing sense, and I think Trudeau even mentioned this once publicly and kind of shocked me a little bit, that spending more in healthcare won't fix all of the problems. There are a lot of entrenched issues. There's people with special interest in healthcare. We need to look at process and systems. I talk to doctors on occasion, heads of departments, that are incredibly frustrated at the lack of innovation and how just entrenched people are. So I think the healthcare system needs a jolt of innovation. We need to look at effectively rebuilding the system. And I'm still talking about universal healthcare access. I will point out one other thing on healthcare too is the role of the private sector. And I don't mean paying with healthcare with your credit card. I mean, and Cameron Love, the president, CEO of the Ottawa Hospital, said it at a dinner that we're talking about. There are many aspects of the current healthcare system that Canadians don't realize are private.
Start with your family doctor.
The family doctor is, in fact, an entrepreneur.
Yes.
And I've had so much to say. I was going to talk about the lab system, though. The lab system that we go to, generally speaking, to get our blood tests is all private. So, the president and CEO of the Ottawa Hospital was saying that there will be an ever increasing role of the private sector in the public healthcare system, though. I think the example he potentially used, Sam, is perhaps a ambulatory healthcare center that would be separate from hospitals. So, as we all know, one of the big challenges with hospitals is having the right people in the hospital and making sure that they're not attracting people who simply don't have a GP.
But if you think about the federal role here, I mean, all of this is
the Canada Health Care Act.
It's the Canada Health Act, and what can the feds do? Because they can only help healthcare, I'm going to say, sort of at the margins, in a sense, right? Because the provinces are the ones who will decide whether this doctor can be accredited from Quebec to be here, or vice versa. But they can do things like expand the scope of the Canada Health Act. Nurse practitioners, for example. That was one of the issues that did come up recently. We've been talking about nurse practitioners and giving them a proper role since,
the dawn of time.
The dawn of time, that's right.
Yes.
Never really happened, right?
Yeah.
So now finally we're getting a little tiny bit of a nudge at the federal level to make sure that they will be covered. And if they are, then you might see a whole flourishing set of professionals who will come in, take some of the pressure off your family doctor and off the system in general. So those are the kinds of things the feds can do, and it's the kind of conversation we're not really having during this election.
No, really, really good point. I want to, time has gone by so fast today, but I want to talk about job creation, because I think when we look at the unemployment rates, people get a little bit nervous. We get a little bit nervous about what's happening south of the border. People are not, looking at layoff plans and not hiring plans. From your perspective, that job creation conversation, has that happened at the level it should have happened, whether it be knocking on doors or the leadership debates?
I think that it has. Again, the job creation conversation, I think, comes down to just the battle of two different ideologies. When you take a look at the Liberal platform, it's all government-driven investment incentives. It's tax cuts. It's new government agencies to administer public loans. Whereas if you take a look at the Conservative platform, it's all very much hands-off, tax cuts, not necessarily new government spending to spur investment. Mark Carney likes to use this word catalyze. You know, the government's balance sheet can catalyze investment. I don't know what that means. I don't know if that's true or not, but at a fundamental level, the pitch isn't actually that different from both of these front-running parties. They're talking about putting money and attention on resource development. They're talking about cutting business taxes, and they're talking about decoupling from the United States and taking a look at where Canada can bolster our trading relationship with other allies. The pitch is more or less the same. It's just the methodology of how you get there. I do wonder if business-minded voters are averse to going back to the liberal way of doing things, and I'd be curious to hear what you're hearing from the business community on that, Mike.
Let's do that.
Yeah, well, one of the ideas I thought that was interesting that the Conservatives brought up was just increasing the number of tradespeople and covering their tuition, and you're perhaps helping. Well, hopefully, they're paying Algonquin and the other colleges, St. Lawrence, the appropriate amount. But I thought the tradespeople idea was interesting to get things rolling, to help these young people get into well-paying occupations. Helping the colleges with tuitions, helping propel and address the housing crisis and that. I thought that was one of the interesting issues, but I think a lot of the debate, to your point, is kind of happened at a macro level, right? So it's been about, energy and pipelines and LNG factories and that type of stuff, and that's going to spur,
infrastructure.
Yeah, big infrastructure. Yeah. That's the catalyzation, I think, Mark Carney's talking about.
But no one to build them.
Yeah, well,
right?
that's where the trade people come.
So if you could blend the two platforms together, right? You'd get the big projects and the catalysts, and then you'd get all these skills people who have been, brought forward from the Tory program, and everything would be great.
It's going to be so interesting to see what happens. We have a couple minutes left. Let's just touch a little bit on defense, because I think it's something that probably I'll put up my hand and say, I don't think I thought about this in the last election, but defense has really been sparked this election because of what's happening south of the border, and we've always kind of thought, well, we've got a great friend in the United States. Do you think people are thinking about defense spending and the GDP and the 2% and all of that? Christina?
I don't know if people are thinking about the 2% because I'm not really sure what that means in actual fact in terms of what we do. But yes, do we need to increase not necessarily our spending, but our defenses, ergo our spending? Yes, I think people are thinking probably about that. In Ottawa, they certainly are. It's the biggest department in town, right, for the federal government. But we know clearly that we don't necessarily have a friend south of the border now. We have been freeloaders for a long time. In the defense realm. So we need to pick ourselves up. And I think people realize that. They're hearing it from both parties. And when parties actually agree on something, then probably it means they're pointing in the right direction. What we do in terms of, how many bases should we have in the Arctic? What about our icebreakers? What about the submarine? We're finally managing to float for the first time after 10 years of repairs. I don't think people are at that level. Right. But I think they understand that this is an area where, A, we're going to need to do better, and B, we're going to need to compensate people better, too. People who are actually in the military. Unless you're at a really high level, you're not getting all that well treated, and I think we all would like to see them treated better.
That could be a whole other show.
It could.
To be honest with you, I've certainly worked in that field and certainly understand the compensation is certainly not there. And then we can talk about veterans and how they're treated. That's a whole other show as well. Defense spending, David, how do you think we've done in terms of this election? Has there been enough chatter about this? Is this on the minds of Canadians from your perspective?
Yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised by the defense conversation because it is a thing that has been neglected as long as I've been alive by successive governments. It's not a conservative problem. It's not a liberal problem. It's just a problem. And what I have been encouraged by in this election campaign is that there hasn't really been any politicking around the defense file. You have both frontrunners committing to serious reform and meeting Canada's obligations to our partners, not only for their sake, but for our sake as well, because we can't rely on the U.S. the way that we used to. It's kind of a silver lining of this whole Trump thing is that it's shone the spotlight on an issue which frankly has not been relevant in any of the past number of federal elections. Now it suddenly is. So I think there's a real opportunity here, a generational opportunity to really focus the attention of decision makers and government at the highest level on making the necessary reforms in defense procurement so that we can start rebuilding Canada's military back to what it once was and what it should be.
Well, and I think about the businesses in this community that hire and have long-standing contracts. That impact would be what we would need right now. That would be a boost to the local economy, would it not, Michael?
Yeah, I'll start on the higher level and work down to local. I think there's a growing appreciation that all of these tens of billions in new defense spending can be part of a bigger industrial policy for Canada. So we don't always need to be buying, billions.
A military-industrial complex.
Yeah, well, it may be a little bit, not to the U.S., but that we should be making. There should be a Canadian economic impact in the tens of billions in spending there. But I think you're absolutely right, Sam, and it's remarkable to me the number of discussions I've had in the past few weeks saying that the defense sector might be a very significant economic opportunity